Hey, welcome back to the course. Let's just jump right into it. We're going to start with the critical question. Why should anybody use Peerscholar? More specifically, what is it that Peerscholar does that's unique, and how can it add to the things that you're already doing to enhance your students' future success? Okay, I like to start with this analogy. I like to say the following. You can learn a lot about karate in an hour. But if you want to learn to do karate, it's a whole different process. Specifically, knowledge, you can gain knowledge through simple exposure. If you're in some engaging lecture or you're reading an engaging book, that can be all you need. You get exposed to some piece of knowledge and you can learn it and know it for life. Very quick, instantaneously. Skills, though, develop slowly and only with repeated structured practice. I say here, preferably within a feedback-rich context. Think of some skill, playing a musical instrument, or maybe dancing or doing karate. When you first begin these activities, you're not very good. If you want to get good, the road is hard work. You have to actually engage in the skill, even though you're not very good at it yet. You have to engage in it, and if you do that in a repeated way, in a structured environment, and you get lots of feedback, then each time you practice, you will get better and better and better. That is how skills develop. Now, in universities, we teach mostly knowledge. Partly because it's easy to do. You can do it with simple exposure. Skills are much more of a challenge, but obviously our ultimate goal is to produce students who don't only possess the relevant knowledge, but they also have these skills that they need to work with the knowledge. And so optimally, we would like to be developing these skills at the same time as we're providing the knowledge and have these two things interact, right? But skill learning is tough, as I suggest here. Well, first of all, what are the skills we're actually talking about? I'm going to use the term transferable skills. You'll see some examples where they can be used to develop actual skills, like playing guitar. But I'm going to focus on so-called transferable skills because they're really a focus of a lot of educators these days, and for good reason. There's a lot of evidence to suggest now that this idea of a student training for some specific job and then taking that job and keeping it for the rest of their life, that just doesn't happen anymore. Students often upon graduation move from job to job, and sometimes these jobs are in fact extremely different from one another. And so in order to succeed, what the student needs are these core skills that they can take from job to job that make them just as effective in one kind of position as another. If we can teach these transferable skills, they are really key to student success. Well, what are we talking about? Different people list different sets and when they talk about transferable skills, but these are the common suspects, so to speak. Top on the list is critical thinking. The ability to analyze, compare, evaluate, question, differentiate, categorize. This is a real core skill employers are constantly asking for. Well, they often ask for problem solving, which is really a mix of critical thinking, being able to understand and analyze the problem, and creative thinking, the ability to solve it, so to build or modify or solve or improve. So creative thinking is one of these transferable skills that's very important. Communication, all the thinking in the world does you no good if it dies in your head. So literally the ability to communicate, and usually when we say that we mean expressively communicate, to get information out of our head, but also the ability to sit down and listen to somebody else and learn from what they're saying. That's what we call receptive communication. These skills are critical to success. Collaboration, everything is collaborative these days. Very seldom do you have a job where you're just going to be working all on your own, so you have to learn how to work respectfully with others. And something called metacognition. Metacognition is this knowing really what your strengths and weaknesses are. Being able to identify things that maybe you would like to improve upon yourself. This is core to learning, it's core to personal growth. So if we could teach our students these sorts of skills, they would be well suited for success across a range of contexts. In fact, could very ably move from context to context and be successful along the way. Once again, skills are hard to teach. Repeated structured practice. How do we give our students that kind of repeated structured practice? And that's really where Peerscholar comes in. So let's do a concrete example. Let's imagine a Peerscholar activity, and I'm sure many of you have heard about Beyond Meat now. This plant-based burger, and in fact sausage and other things as well, that looks like meat, tastes like meat, has the texture of meat. And so now that these sorts of things exist, one can ask the question, should humans continue to eat meat? So imagine we asked a group of students to write an argument piece. They could either argue for or against eating meat, but that was their task. Go ahead and create some compelling argument using, of course, your critical thought, but also, well, let's just go into this. So if we look at the first step, you have to create this argument, and to do that, yeah, you're going to have to engage critical thought. You're going to have to engage creative thought too, because when you're creating an argument, you got to figure out how to put the pieces together in an effective way to tell a narrative that's compelling. And of course, that all involves expressive communication too. How are you going to communicate these ideas? So these kinds of things are part of any traditional activity too, correct? Right? If an instructor asks a student to do something like this, then we would expect some exercise of these tasks. Now, here's the extra stuff that happens with Peerscholar. If they submit this composition now and they move to the assess phase, and now they're going to see the work of their peers, the compositions, and they're going to be asked to assess those. Well, once again, there's a lot of critical thought involved. Now, notice the asterisk. I'll come back to that in a moment. But imagine a student is looking at a peer's work and they're trying to decide how it could be better, how it could be improved. So now they have to critically analyze it. They have to find the weaknesses in the work. Then they have to creatively think about how those weaknesses could be fixed to improve it. Then they have to communicate all of this to that peer, right? To give them a clear idea of how the student thinks their work could be better. Now, why the star? Well, because they're going to do this for multiple peers. So they're going to do all this for the first peer, then the second, then the third. So all of this practice is being multiplied. It's also being focused on something that is already an argument. So people are thinking critically and creatively and talking about arguments, which amplifies things a little more. We'll come to the amplifier. I also want to express that this isn't a collaborative environment, that when students are giving feedback, they have to learn how to do that in a respectful way in order for it to be effective. So they're learning some of these social interaction skills as they provide feedback to their students, and metacognitive awareness. When students see the work of their fellow peers, they get a very strong sense of where their work fits. Really good idea of their strengths and weaknesses. And so, I like to say it's one thing for your instructor to say you are a C student. It's something else for you to say, I am a C student. It's a very powerful learning signal. Okay, so now the students get all this practice in the assess phase. They then move to the reflect phase where they get all the feedback that students have given to their work. And now once again, for each piece of feedback, we ask them to think critically about that feedback. Do you agree with it? Do you think if you did what this person said, your work would be better? Well, to answer that, you also have to think creatively. What if I did change my work the way this person suggested? Would it be better? This is all in the context of receptive communication now. You're not speaking, you're listening. You're listening to what others are saying about your work, engaging critical and creative thought in that context. So you're generalizing the context in which you're employing these skills. Once again, I've got the asterisk because you do this over and over for each bit of peer feedback. Once again, it's collaboration, but now you're on the receiving end of the feedback. So you're learning what it feels like to have somebody say certain things about your work, which is going to inform your ability to communicate respectfully in the future. And metacognitive awareness, again, well, these are a bunch of people talking about how your work can be better. So you're certainly going to be learning a lot about your work and what others, how others perceive it. Okay, so let's look. We had those three things over on the left, right, to begin with the create. But when you put the activity in the context of Peerscholar, everything gets multiplied, right? You get this repeated, structured practice within a feedback-rich context. Let me also highlight that the stuff that's happening in the assess and reflect phases is all student-driven. It's the students doing this. So they're getting all of this critical practice, and they're getting it in a way that does not require extra time and effort on the part of the faculty or extra class time. This can be done as an assignment that students are doing as homework, so to speak. And so they're getting the practice that they need, and they can get it within the constraints of our system. Okay, that's what makes Peerscholar special, and really what makes it super powerful. I've already kind of mentioned this a couple times, but the amplifier characteristic, this is my amplifier, by the way. I quite like this little amp. But if you think of a guitar amplifier, you put input into it and it makes everything louder. So, that idea of creating an argument for eating meat, for example. Well, now everybody's assessing other people's arguments. So they're learning a lot more about arguments than if they had just done one themselves. They're seeing a bunch of other examples. They're learning from them. That's what Peerscholar does, is amplify a learning experience. And it can amplify anything. So for example, what if you asked your students to submit videos of them giving a presentation? That's a use case we're going to talk about now and then in this course. Well, now they're going to, yes, give the presentation and submit it in step 1, but now they're going to see and assess a bunch of their peers giving presentations. Peers that are maybe good in certain things, not so good in other things. And so they're really kind of, again, amplifying their learning of what makes a good oral presentation. Whatever you ask students to do in the create phase, the learning that would cause becomes amplified throughout the rest of it. And that's very powerful. Okay, so hopefully some of this stuff is kind of kicking in. Let me just end with one other point of how this sort of learning might fit into the bigger university picture. If your campus is like, well, pretty much every other campus, then one of the hot issues now is something called experiential learning. And it involves asking students to work on some project that is actually relevant. It's maybe a problem that's facing maybe some external entity, some third party out in the real world, and your students are able to work with them on this real problem. Those sorts of experiential opportunities have been shown to foster really great learning. Here it says deeper insights, longer lasting learning, and those things are true. But in addition, these things work really well when the student is prepared for them. These experiences ask students to think critically and to think creatively in a real world or authentic context. Well, that's great unless they're learning to think critically and creatively in that context. Like, wouldn't we rather they have a basic foundation of these skills before they go into experiential learning context? That's what Experience with Peerscholar can provide. It can give them some exercise. Remember, every skill starts out not very strong. So if we strengthen these skills with Peerscholar in the safe classroom environment, and then allow students to use them in more authentic experiential learning environments, that will make the success of experiential learning stronger, better, more powerful. And that sort of shows how basic training with these skills can augment other learning experiences and make the whole student educational process much better. All right. So, why use Peerscholar? Well, the goal I think we all have is to have our students possess the relevant knowledge and the skills they need to work with it effectively. But the skills part has always been a challenge. We do the knowledge part well. How do we do the skill part? That's what Peerscholar. It's all about the skills, baby. It provides a nice, clear solution that fits within the university constraints, does not require a lot out of faculty, but really gives the students a fantastic educational experience that literally will impact their future success. That's why people should consider using Peerscholar, and that's really why we're jazzed on it and want to see its effects maximized as much as we can. So cool. All right, there's the why. Let's go on in the next two videos. We're going to show you, in the first one, we're going to show you what it actually feels like to go through a Peerscholar activity from a student perspective. And then we're going to, in the next video, show you from an instructor perspective what's involved in setting up a classic Peerscholar activity. Okay, so I will see you in the next videos. Bye-bye.